Hey everybody, Jason Sherman here. In today's episode of Zero to CEO, I sit with branding and naming expert Grant Polachek. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And today we're going to talk about how to find a great name for your startup. The Googles, the Yahoos, in my case, the Spinners and the Vengos, very cool names. And we all have an idea and a story behind where we come up with those names. So before we get into all the nuts and bolts, let's talk about how best to come up with a name for your business in a way that makes sense, not only for like the reasoning behind the startup, but also if people can like make sense out of the name and be maybe like a play on words.
Right.
How do you balance the two?
Absolutely. The first thing to know about naming is no name is perfect. A lot of our clients come to us and they say, well, I want a name that is both descriptive and it's short and it's funny and you just can't do that. You have to pick one of the many things that you can do with the name. So the first thing you need to do when you're coming up with a name, and I think this is the biggest mistake that we see, um, is you need to understand what your brand is. You need to take a step back and say, you're not a fashion brand. You're something much bigger and more interesting and richer than that. So once you understand who you want to be, then you can go on from there. And then it's really about following a very specific process. You want to then, use the tools to create good names, which isn't always easy. Um, and then you go into a really important part, which is validation. So you need to take your name and say, is somebody else using this? You
Right.
don't want a cease and desist letter because of a,
Well,
trademark
well, we'll
conflict.
we'll get into
Yeah,
those
exactly.
pieces. We'll get into those points. So, like, let's talk about what makes a great name and why the name matters so much for the
Yep.
startup.
I think there's two really important things to understand when it comes to why a name matters. One is with regards to perception, and this is always the core concept. Throughout history, we see that names are always important. You go through a ritual where you're becoming a man in ancient culture, so many of them. You change your name. You get married. What do? You change your name. Um, there's power there. And you just can't deny that because it lives, a name lives within an experience, right? You're going about your day doing things. And I think a lot of people,
Right.
when they're doing branding and naming, they forget that all of this lives within, I'm brushing my teeth.
Right.
It's not some abstract concept. I'm actually picking up a toothbrush and putting it in my mouth, and I have to call it something,
Yeah, like
you know?
what are the motions in your day? What are the things that you're doing in your day that kind of relate to what
Right.
you're doing? Yeah.
Exactly. And I see that word crest on it or whatever it is. So, within that actual experience, you want your name to align with whatever experience you're trying to create.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. One of my favorite brands right now is Warby Parker.
Mm.
It's so classic. And
Yeah.
in the world where so many brands are going away from classic, it works so well
And
because they stick with,
it's funny when I first heard Warby Parker, this is years ago, right? It was like 10 years ago. I was like, I had no idea it was glasses, right?
hmm
These wooden glasses. But then
right,
once I knew that they were wooden glasses, then I'm like, oh, they
right.
made this like class, like you said, classy,
Classic, very
right?
classic,
But you didn't
classic.
but they chose that path
Absolutely.
of not letting you know what the product was with the name, right? Like other
Right.
companies have.
Absolutely.
So
And most big
there's a
companies
fine
have
line.
done that. I mean, a lot of startups think that they need a name that tells you what they do, but if you look at most companies, it doesn't tell you what they do. So, and I think that's the big myth. The other thing that's important with why is a name important is it lives within this customer journey. So the first thing I do, let's say I see an ad, right? That's the first step. And I have a terrible name. What happens? Less people click on that
Of
ad.
course.
Like it's a real thing like, it's not hypothetical. It's not some strange branding principle that somebody came up with in their PhD thesis. Less people click on your ad.
Let
And
me
that
ask you a
happens
question.
yeah.
This is you're bringing up a great point that's not part of what I wanted to ask you. So let's say you come up with an idea for a startup. We'll call it like Bougie Bougie, and like the name is really bad, but you decide, let me test it, Bougie Bougie and Gucci Gucci and Doogie Doogie on a bunch of
hmm
different ads and see which one
Yeah.
performs best. Is that something
hmm
that you think is like a good idea to
It's
do?
it's hard to do that because you need a lot of other things to test it in
Okay.
that way,
Such
right? You need a
as,
landing page, you need a
okay,
messaging, so you're going to have to spend a lot of money most businesses can't do that,
okay,
right? Like if you're selling glasses, you have to print 12 logos, right? Or three logos in your example. Some can. What we do is we do a simpler test where it's a little bit more hypothetical, but we
Okay.
absolutely 1,000% believe in testing. You should take your names, you should vet them against each other with real people to see how those performs. And we have some great stories. One of
Maybe do
them that
maybe do a survey with like a
do a
bunch of
survey.
names.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of
Okay.
our core parts of our naming process. Take a survey. Usually want to whittle it down to a decent number so you're not vetting, 20 names against each other where
Right.
nobody, is even reading them. Um,
And I'd love to hear your story that you were gonna bring up.
oh yeah. It was it's one of my favorite stories. We were doing this test and there was a name, a word within a name that
Okay.
was it was pretty off-putting. And nobody caught it. It went through like 12 people and
Oh
nobody
no.
caught it. And then it went through this test and everybody's like, no, not that one. We read it again. We're like, oh,
There's a word in
whoops.
there.
Yeah. And it was just, it was blended in kind of in the middle.
That's
Uh,
funny.
but yeah.
So like when it comes to like picking a name, we know like why it matters, right? But then you have to link it to like your brand. And
Hmm.
that's tough because if the name like Warby Parker for me, for example, is a good
Hmm.
example, I had no idea what that was.
Right.
And then when I
Right.
finally looked it up, I saw it was glasses. So how do you link it to the brand? How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
connect it?
And that's the beauty of, I call it brand imagination. Most people aren't trained in this. So you shouldn't do it by yourself. If
Okay.
you're an accountant, you probably haven't developed that brand imagination muscle. Just like I don't know how to go through a ledger very well, and I
Right.
shouldn't do that myself. Um,
That's a good
but
point.
but you look at there are some basic practices. You're looking for a symbol, you're looking for a story, you're looking for you I mean a lot of times it goes down to a symbol or a story or a word
And it's got to
that
connect, right?
align.
Like a
It's got to
connection,
connect.
right?
However, the descriptive connection is less important than, and if you can, as I was saying, if you look at names like Slack, you know
Right.
you know
Hey, you're
it's
slacking off, really, is what it kind of reminds me of,
yeah,
right? Or
exactly,
cut me
yeah. And they
or cut me some slack, but it doesn't really mean like work, right?
It
It's kind
doesn't mean work. It
or
almost means the
or
opposite of
collaborate.
work in a lot
Yeah,
of places. But
strange.
what did they do? They were very disruptive, right?
Yeah.
So that name felt what we call it an outlier name. It feels like an outlier, and then you can build this brand around it,
Yeah.
right?
Makes
Skull
sense.
Candy is another one that I think it just feels like, what?
Yeah, or
You
Death
know,
Water, right? Isn't there Death
Deathwater,
Water?
right? And they do that on purpose so you can build this, really rich in your face brand. It's that's the play. How do I connect this to one core thing? Warby Parker is classic. Deathwater is really in your face.
Slack
And
is
there's a
the
lot of
opposite of
things.
what it means. I get it.
Exactly.
No, here's the
Yeah.
question though, right? You find the words Slack. That's what you guys came up with, but like how the hell do you get slack.com? I mean, how do you get the great domain? I mean, I got
Yeah.
really, really lucky in my startup career for the past 20 years that I've been able to land the domain names for
Yeah.
the startups that I've created.
Yeah.
I sometimes I
Yeah.
get mind blown. I'm like, how is this domain available? But most people are not that
Right.
lucky. So how do
Right.
you do that?
I mean, that is a huge part of what our business does. We curate domains. So we ourselves have a marketplace. Um, most of many domains are for sale. They just aren't for sale at a registrar for $9 or whatever the going rate is.
Right.
Um,
You're paying
so
2,000 to 50,000.
yeah,
They're crazy numbers.
50,000, for a name like Slack, probably
Couple million,
200,000. Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, Slack isn't yeah, 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 easily 200,000,
Yeah.
definitely. So
So what do you do to get around those? Like, say you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a lot of money. You came up
hmm
with, zebra pants. That's like your
hmm
thing. You zebra instead of tiger stripes, you did
right,
the zebra stripes.
yeah.
How do you come up
You
with the domain for that? What do you do to get around that? Because
you
zebra.com is not
lots of
available.
ideas, lots of ideas. We started as a crowdsourcing platform. You don't have to do crowdsourcing, but get your friends, get out a piece of paper, um, find find lot. You just have to do a lot. You can't fall in love with a name. That is one of the most important principles of naming. You
Right.
are going to have many names that you come up with that you can't get the domain, somebody else is using, and that just means you have to throw it out and go find something else. No matter
So
how
so
much you love it, no matter how much it feels right to you, people talk about, oh, it just feels perfect. I
So
don't
you
care.
don't
You can't have it.
you don't recommend adding a word to it,
If you want a cease and
or
desist
choosing.
letter, then definitely.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, let's say there's like a clothing company,
Right.
called Plaster, and you
Right.
came up with a new plaster for
For
walls. And
something else. Yeah, absolutely.
can you call
Yeah,
it
you can.
plastertool.com instead of plaster.com? I mean,
You certainly can. There's a reason that no big company does that. There's a reason Tesla, as quickly as they possibly could, moved out of Tesla Motors, and they're one of the ones that could get away with it because they're selling cars. If you're
right.
a digital brand, you really want your brand. Now the solution is, um, something like Snapchat.
Yeah.
I think Snapchat is a phenomenal name. Short, simple, clean. It comes out of the mouth with a little plosives. Um, but it's not something that everybody else would want. So you
Right.
can probably get something, like that
Yeah.
with an affordable domain. And you can in some industries you can add, like we were talking about Tesla Motors. A lot of people will start with that
Until they get popular, and then
until they can
they
get
have enough
popular.
money to buy the other domain. And
The other
some,
th
do you
the other
think
thing,
maybe
just
doing it backwards too, like finding a domain that you like
yeah,
first and then using that name?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I don't want to run out of too much time before we cover
yeah,
couple of something else, because AI is huge in the world right now. Everybody's been using ChatGPT, of course, and other
yeah,
Geminis and Perplexities. So where is the role of AI in the naming and branding industry
yeah.
in your mind right now? Like, what are you seeing?
Um, you know, I've tried ChatGPT. It's not very good yet.
Okay.
I think if you understand naming really, really, really well, you might be able to prompt it.
Hmm.
But it's not easy. Um, Many of the AI generators that I've seen so far are very poor. Um,
Interesting.
we are working on something. We have what we call the Name Genome Project. We've been tracking naming data for about 8 years now.
Wow.
Um,
It's a long time.
yeah, it's really interesting. We know a lot about the keywords that people like and why they like them and things like that. We have a AI powered business name generator. It's not
Okay.
bad. It's not bad. Um,
Better than ChatGPT, I'm assuming,
it's
because
better than ChatGPT because we know what we're doing. Um, I think it's the best one, but I'm of course biased. We're working on a new one that's going to be even better.
okay.
Um, the a lot of times with any sort of brainstorming, what can be great is spurring your own ideas as well. An AI tool can definitely help you think of a lot of different words that you would have never thought of.
Right.
So that's another great way to do it. But be careful for sure. Be careful with that. And don't just grab the first thing that you see. That's for sure.
All right. And before we plug your website, I want to know,
Yeah.
because everyone's going to be asking me, like, how much money do you think they should spend on getting the perfect name,
Yeah.
both name, branding, trademark, domain? Like, what's the whole
hmm
cost that you think goes associated with that?
Um, it just depends on your business. I like to think of it. We're in the works of building this concept of the ROI of your brand. Um, there's studies out there that rank the how much your brand impacts your actual revenue anywhere between, I believe it's 12 and 28%. So you can do a reverse calculation,
Okay.
say, I want to be here in this amount of time.
Makes
I want to have
sense.
$1 million business, and then you do the math. You will lose money if you have a bad name. That's the important part. You'll lose the clicks, you lose the referrals, you lose this. So if you don't want to lose X amount of dollars based on, let's say, 10% of your revenue over 5 years or something, that's how much you should invest.
Got it.
Um, yeah.
That's a good rule of thumb.
Mhm.
And where can people find out more about your incredible AI naming generator?
So we're at atom.com, atom.com.
Talk about good domain names. How'd you land that one?
Well, we just rebranded. So we were Squad Help for a long time. It's only been a few months that we're at Atom.com. And as a naming marketplace, that's what we do. So we were able to figure out how to get that.
Sweet.
But we can definitely help other people get single English word domains as well. They just have to reach out or go to our website.
Awesome, guys. Check out atomadam.com if you want to get a good name for your startup. Hope you guys learned something, and we'll see you in the next episode.